When my son got married, I kept secret the $140 million fortune that my late wife had left me. As it turned out, that was the wisest decision of my life, because just a few days later, his new wife showed up unannounced at my doorstep, accompanied by a lawyer to hand over an eviction notice demanding that I pack up and get out of my own house within 72 hours. Welcome to Silent Sweet Revenge. I am incredibly grateful you are here. Before we dive into Arthur's journey, comment below with your city or country, so I know where you are watching from. Also, please note, this story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing names or settings is coincidental, but the message conveyed is highly useful. The brass gear slipped between my fingers for the third time that morning, and I let out a slow breath through my nose the way Meredith used to tell me I did whenever I was concentrating too hard on something that deserved patience. She was right, as she almost always was. 40 years of marriage had given her an unfair advantage in understanding me. I set the gear down on the green felt mat I kept spread across the coffee table and reached for my magnifying glass. The antique grandfather clock in front of me had belonged to Meredith's mother. It had not run properly in 11 months, which was not coincidentally about as long as Meredith had been gone. I had been meaning to fix it since the week after the funeral. Something kept stopping me. I think I was afraid that once the clock was running again, time would feel real in a way I was not ready for. The morning light coming through the front windows of our Portland home was the particular shade of gold that only happens in late September, when summer has already started letting go, but has not quite admitted it yet. The roses Meredith planted along the south fence were still holding their last blooms. Deep red, almost burgundy. She always said that September roses were the most honest flowers in any garden because they knew they were running out of time and bloomed anyway. I was thinking about that, about roses and time and the particular stubbornness of beautiful things, when I heard the sound of tires on the gravel driveway. Not the familiar crunch of a neighbor turning around or a delivery truck slowing to check an address. This was deliberate. This was someone arriving with intention. I set down my magnifying glass and leaned forward in my armchair to look through the front window. A black Mercedes SUV had pulled into my driveway with the quiet confidence of a vehicle that had never worried about a parking ticket in its life. The engine cut off. Both doors opened at the same time. My daughter-in-law, Chloe, stepped out of the passenger side. She was wearing a white blazer over dark tailored pants, her dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look less like someone dropping by to visit her father-in-law, and more like someone arriving to close a deal. She did not look toward the house the way a person does when they are visiting family. She looked at it the way a contractor looks at a job site. The man who climbed out of the driver's side I had never seen before. He was somewhere in his late 30s, broad-shouldered in a navy suit that cost more than my first car, carrying a leather briefcase with both hands, like it contained something fragile or something dangerous. He had the particular posture of a man who had learned early in life that entering a room slightly ahead of everyone else established a psychological advantage. I recognized the type from 40 years of engineering meetings. Men who performed competence rather than practicing it. I wiped my hands on the shop rag I kept draped over the arm of my chair and pushed myself to my feet. My knees reminded me, as they did every morning now that I was 70 years old. I walked to the front door and opened it before they reached the porch steps. "Chloe," I said, keeping my voice warm, keeping my face open. "This is unexpected. Is Julian with you?" She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She did not smile. She did not take off her sunglasses. In 7 days of being my daughter-in-law, she had hugged me twice at the wedding and sent one text message that said, "Thanks for everything, Arthur." Now she was standing at the base of my porch steps like I was someone she had scheduled an appointment with. "He couldn't make it," she said. Her voice was flat and professional. the voice of someone reading from a script they had rehearsed enough times that it no longer required emotion. "This is Craig Sterling. He's handling the legal side of things." Craig Sterling stepped onto my porch without being invited. He did not extend his hand. He opened his briefcase with 2 quick clicks, removed a thick manila envelope, and placed it on the small wooden table beside my rocking chair, with the kind of practiced efficiency that made it clear he had done this exact thing many times before. "Mr. Vance," he said, "my name is Craig Sterling. I represent the interests of the new title holders of this property. I'm here to deliver a writ of possession, which has been issued following the execution of a duly notarized power of attorney transferring ownership of this residence. Under Oregon law, this document grants the title holders immediate right of occupancy." He paused the way lawyers pause when they want a specific word to land. "You have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings and vacate the premises. That deadline is 8 o'clock Friday morning. If you remain in the property after that time, local law enforcement will be contacted to facilitate your removal." I looked at Craig Sterling for a long moment. Then I looked at Chloe, who had still not moved from the bottom of the steps, who was examining the peeling paint on my porch railing with the bored attention of someone waiting for a prescription to be filled. "Chloe," I said. I kept my voice quiet. I kept it steady. "Where is my son?" She finally turned her face toward me. Behind those dark lenses, I could not read her eyes. "Julian is at work, Arthur. This isn't something that needs both of us. Craig is handling everything." She paused. "It would really be better for everyone if you just cooperated." I reached down and picked up the manila envelope. It was heavier than I expected. I held it in both hands for a moment, feeling the weight of it, and then I did something that seemed to confuse both of them. I reached into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt and removed the pen I always kept there, a simple ballpoint with a cartridge I had replaced myself, though the barrel itself was something I had modified years ago in the workshop. The ink it left behind was standard blue. What Craig Sterling and Chloe could not see was the secondary cartridge nested inside the barrel, the one that deposited a microscopic magnetic tracer compound on anything the pen touched. I pressed the pen briefly against the outside of the envelope just at the corner where my thumb rested naturally, and then I tucked the pen back into my pocket. "Thank you," I said. I said it without sarcasm. I said it the way a man says thank you when he means it for reasons the other person will not understand until much later. Craig Sterling placed a business card on the table beside the rocking chair. "All further communication regarding this matter should be directed to my office. Do not attempt to contact my clients directly." He picked up his briefcase. Chloe turned and walked back to the Mercedes. She said something to Sterling in a low voice as they reached the vehicle, and I heard the tail end of it clearly from the porch. Easier than I thought. She did not look back. The Mercedes reversed out of my driveway and disappeared down the street. I stood on my porch for a moment, with the envelope in my hands. A jay landed on Meredith's rose fence and then thought better of it and flew away. The grandfather clock inside the house was silent, as it had been for 11 months. I went inside, closed the front door behind me, and carried the envelope to the kitchen. I set it on the granite island and pulled out the bar stool Meredith used to sit on when she watched me cook, because she always said she could tell more about a recipe from watching the cook's hands than from reading it herself. I sat down, opened the envelope, and spread the documents across the cold stone surface. My reading glasses were in my shirt pocket. I put them on. I looked at the signature on the final page of the power of attorney document. Harrison Arthur Vance. Every loop and angle exactly as I had written my name on tax returns and property documents for 4 decades. My hands did not shake. My chest did not tighten. What happened instead was quieter and more dangerous than either of those things. 40 years as a mechanical engineer had taught me that the most catastrophic failures are never the ones that announce themselves with noise and heat and obvious drama. The worst failures are the ones that have been building silently along a fault line nobody thought to inspect. They feel, when they finally give way, not like an explosion, but like the last piece of a puzzle clicking into place to reveal a picture you wish you had never seen. I looked at the signature that was not mine, and the puzzle clicked. I reached for my jeweler's loupe from the kitchen drawer, where I kept my tools, settled it over my right eye, and bent close to the paper. The loupe pressed against my right eye, the way it always had, cool and familiar. The brass rim worn smooth from 30 years of inspecting things that looked fine from a distance and were not. I brought my face to within 3 inches of the signature at the bottom of the power of attorney document. The overhead kitchen light cast a clean, even illumination across the paper, and through the magnifying lens, the world narrowed down to a single line of ink on white stock. Harrison Arthur Vance. Every mechanical engineer learns early that materials tell the truth even when people do not. Metal fractures along stress lines that were always there, invisible to the naked eye, but plain as a highway once you know how to look. Paper is the same way. Ink on paper carries the biography of the hand that made it, the pressure variations, the slight trembling hesitation at the start of an unfamiliar stroke. The way a genuine signature accelerates through its familiar middle section, because the hand has written it 10,000 times and knows the way by instinct. I had signed my name on engineering contracts, property deeds, insurance forms, and Christmas cards for 50 years. I knew exactly what my signature looked like under magnification. I knew the hairline thickening at the base of the capital H, where my pen always pressed slightly harder at the start. I knew the way the V in Vance finished with a microscopic upward flick, a habit I had picked up from my father without ever meaning to. What I was looking at now had none of that. The ink sat on the paper with a perfect undisturbed uniformity that no human hand produces. Every stroke was exactly the same depth. There were no pressure variations, no acceleration through the familiar sections, no hesitation at the beginning. The lines were reproduced with a consistency that was, in a word, mechanical. Someone had scanned one of my genuine signatures from an old document, cleaned it digitally, and printed it onto this paper using a high-resolution laser system capable of laying down ink in patterns too fine for the naked eye to question. I straightened up and set the loupe on the granite countertop. My jaw was tight. My back molars pressed together the way they do when I am working through a problem that has more dimensions than I initially estimated. I breathed through my nose, slow and deliberate, the way Meredith used to remind me to breathe when I came home from a bad day at the plant. Think like an engineer, Arthur. Identify the fault. Trace it back to the origin. The signature was fabricated. That was the first confirmed fact. But a forged signature on a power of attorney document requires more than just a convincing reproduction of handwriting. It requires a notary seal, a witness, and a date. I pulled the document closer and read the notarization block at the bottom left corner of the page. The notary's name was unfamiliar to me. The seal itself looked legitimate. The embossed state of Oregon symbol, the registration number, the expiration date of the commission, all formatted correctly. But it was the date typed into the acknowledgement line that stopped my breath in my chest like a hand pressed flat against my sternum. August 14th, 2025. I read the date 3 times. Then I set the document down, walked out of the kitchen, and went directly to my private study at the end of the hallway. The room smelled like old paper and machine oil, and the particular staleness of a space where a person spends time alone doing work they never fully explained to anyone else. I went to the bookshelf on the north wall, 3rd shelf from the top, and pulled down the leather journal I had kept for the past 9 years. The journal was thick, its spine cracked in several places from use. I carried it back to the kitchen, set it beside the power of attorney document, and opened it to the August entries. I had started keeping the journal the year after I retired, partly out of the engineer's compulsion to document, and partly because Meredith suggested it might give my hands something to do besides reach for the workshop tools at 11 o'clock at night. I recorded everything in it: weather conditions, mechanical observations, errands, conversations worth remembering, and most relevant to the current moment, the detailed logs of my annual fishing trips. I found the August 14th entry and spread the journal flat with both palms. The handwriting was mine unmistakably, with the pressure variations and personal quirks that no laser printer could replicate. The entry read, August 14th, Day 3 out of Kodiak. Departed harbor 0530 local time, aboard the Resolute Dawn, Captain B. Harlow. Coordinates approximately 57.4 north 153.2 west. Overcast wind north-northwest at 18 knots, swells 4 to 6 feet. No cell coverage since yesterday morning, confirmed with crew that we are well outside any tower range. Water temperature 48 degrees Fahrenheit. Caught 2 halibut before noon, largest approximately 55 pounds. Spent the afternoon on the stern thinking about Meredith. 13 years married before she told me she was afraid of open water. I never found that out until she said it on this exact date 2 years before she got sick. She said she was afraid of how much space there was. I told her the space was the point. She laughed. I miss her laugh more than I can write down in a journal. I had gone to Alaska on August 14th because it was the anniversary of Meredith's death. I went every year now to the place where I felt most completely cut off from everything, because that was the only place where the silence felt chosen rather than imposed. I had no cell service. I had no email access. I was documented on a commercial fishing charter with a registered captain, a full crew, and 14 other passengers, all of whom could place me on a boat in the middle of the Gulf of Alaska. On the exact day, someone had paid a notary to certify that I had appeared before them in Portland, Oregon, and signed away the rights to my home. The power of attorney was not just fraudulent, it was provably, demonstrably, catastrophically fraudulent. The kind of fraudulent that does not survive contact with a federal courtroom. I closed the journal and held it in both hands for a moment. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street, and for a half second I watched it through the kitchen window to make sure it was not a black Mercedes. It was not. My mind was already sorting through what I knew against what I still needed to confirm. The forged signature and the impossible date were structural flaws, the kind that brought an entire building down. But an engineer does not stop at identifying one crack. He tests the integrity of every load-bearing element before he decides what the structure is actually worth. There was the matter of the bank account. I had set up what my financial advisor, Evelyn Ross, called a trigger alert on my primary checking account 18 days ago. After the evening, Julian came over to make soup, and I walked out to the garage to find a socket wrench I had not been asked to find, and came back to a kitchen that smelled like something was burning. The trigger alert was a standing instruction to my bank that any outgoing wire transfer above $500 would send an immediate encrypted notification to a secondary device, a satellite phone I kept in the floor, safe behind the armoire in my bedroom, a device that Evelyn had insisted I acquire 2 years ago when the Meredith Vance Family Trust reached a size that made standard communication channels feel careless. I had checked that phone when I woke up this morning. The screen had shown no alerts. But that had been before 7 o'clock, and wire transfers to out-of-state institutions did not always process until banking hours were fully underway. I pushed back from the kitchen island and walked to the bedroom. The armoire slid aside on its custom casters with the smooth, balanced resistance of something built correctly. I pressed my right thumb against the biometric pad set into the floorboard. The safe opened with a sound like a decision being made. The satellite phone's screen was lit. One notification. Received at 9:47 this morning, while Craig Sterling was still placing his business card on my porch table. I opened the alert. Read it once. Then I sat down on the edge of the bed, still holding the phone, and felt something settle through me, the way cold water settles through a system, not shocking, not painful, just clarifying in a way that made everything slightly more real and slightly more sharp. The alert confirmed what I had already begun to suspect. Someone had moved money, and I already knew with the certainty of a man who had spent his life understanding how systems fail exactly who had moved it, and exactly why it was not going to be enough to save them. I set the satellite phone on the nightstand. I had one call to make. Not to the police, not to a lawyer. To the one person who had helped Meredith build the thing that was about to become the most important fact in this entire situation. I dialed Evelyn Ross. Evelyn picked up on the second ring, the way she always did, as though she kept the phone within arm's reach at all hours, because she understood that the kind of work she did not observe business hours. Arthur. Her voice was crisp and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had managed $140 million in assets for 2 years without once raising it above a conversational register. I was wondering when you'd call. You saw the alert? I said. The moment it came through, $39,985 wired to a company called Meridian Care Solutions, LLC, registered in Cook County, Illinois. I've already started pulling their corporate filings. She paused. Arthur, I need to ask you directly. Are you safe? I'm standing in my bedroom, I said. I'm fine. I need you to hold everything you're finding until I call you back. Don't move any money. Don't flag any accounts. Don't alert anyone. I need them to believe they've won. A brief silence, and then how long do you need? 24 hours, maybe less. I'll have a full forensic package ready, Evelyn said. Everything on Julian and Chloe financials, credit, corporate registrations, wire history. Everything. Good, I said. I'll call you tonight. I ended the call and set the satellite phone on the nightstand beside the photograph of Meredith. I kept there, the one taken on the Oregon coast the summer before she got sick, where she was laughing at something I had said, and the wind was pulling her hair sideways, and she looked so entirely herself that even now looking at it, I had to remind myself to breathe. I picked up my regular cell phone, scrolled to Julian's name, pressed call. It rang 4 times, long enough that I had a moment to construct the voice I needed, the voice of a confused, frightened old man, slightly breathless, the consonants a little soft at the edges, the way they get when a person is working hard not to cry. I had never been an actor, but I had spent 40 years listening to the way structural failures sound in the moments just before they become catastrophic, and I understood that the most convincing performance is not the one with the most emotion. It is the one with the right emotion precisely placed. Julian answered on the 5th ring. Dad? His voice was calm, measured, entirely unsurprised. And that single fact, the absence of any surprise in the voice of a son whose father was calling in the middle of a Tuesday morning, told me everything I needed to confirm before I said another word. Julian. I let my voice catch slightly on his name, a small fracture I placed there deliberately. Julian, something happened this morning. A man came to the house with Chloe. He said I have to leave. He gave me papers. Julian, I don't understand what's happening. Dad, hey, slow down. His tone shifted into something softer, something that would have sounded like compassion to anyone who had not spent 70 years learning the difference between warmth and performance. I know this is a shock. I wanted to be there. I really did. But I thought it might be easier this way without having to see your face when Craig explained things. What things? I said. My voice was trembling now, and I was not entirely faking it, because there is a particular grief in hearing your child lie to you fluently, and no amount of preparation makes it painless. Julian, those papers say I signed something. A power of attorney. I never signed anything. I don't remember signing anything. Dad. He said it gently, patiently. The way you speak to someone who is very young or very old and cannot be expected to fully track a conversation. That's exactly what Dr. Pemberton warned us about. The memory gaps. You signed those documents last month in Craig's office. I was there. Chloe was there. You had coffee, you asked about the parking validation. You just don't remember it. Dr. Pemberton, a name I had never heard connected to any physician I had actually seen. A fabricated medical authority inserted into the narrative with the casual confidence of someone who had rehearsed this script long enough to believe it themselves. I don't have a doctor named Pemberton, I said. You do, Dad. You've been seeing him for 4 months. You just don't. This is what he told us would happen. The gaps get wider. You fill them in with things that feel true but aren't. Julian exhaled slowly, the exhale of a man carrying a burden he wants you to notice. It breaks my heart to tell you this, but you're not well. And Chloe and I have been covering for you for a long time because we didn't want to scare you. I pressed the small digital recorder on the kitchen counter, the one I had clicked on before dialing his number. The red light blinked steadily. Julian, I said. And now I let something real come into my voice, not the performed confusion of a man I was pretending to be, but the actual grief of a father arriving at a conclusion he had been avoiding. Do you remember when your mother turned 50, we drove up to Astoria, the 3 of us, and she found that bookstore on the hill? She bought 7 books, and you carried them all the way back to the car without complaining once. You said it was because she'd carried your backpack for 12 years and it was time to return the favor. A pause. 3 seconds of silence on the line. Of course I remember that, Julian said carefully. She turned 50 in February, I said. We drove to Astoria in February. There was snow on the coast road. There was no snow. Meredith's 50th birthday was in September. We had driven to Astoria in September in warm weather, through green hills, and there had been no snow on any road, because it was early fall and we were in Oregon, and it does not snow on the Oregon coast in September. I had introduced a specific verifiable error into the conversation. A test clean and simple, the kind an engineer runs when he needs to know whether a component will hold under load. Right, Julian said. Yeah, the coast road was bad that year. I remember being worried about the tires on Mom's car. He confirmed the false memory without hesitation. He agreed that there had been snow in September on the Oregon coast, because I had said there was snow, and agreeing was more useful to him in that moment than the truth. The recorder's red light blinked on and off. I let my voice break a clean, genuine crack that I did not have to manufacture, because the sorrow underneath it was entirely real. I'm just so confused, Julian. I feel like I'm losing pieces of myself and I don't know where they're going. I know, Dad. His voice softened further, and for just a moment, just the span of a single breath, I thought I heard something underneath the performance, something younger and less certain. A frequency that might have been the boy I raised trying to surface through the man he had become. Then it was gone. The facility Chloe found is really good. You'll have your own room. They have a garden. You're going to be okay. Will you visit? I asked. The pause before his answer was 4 seconds long. I counted them. Of course, he said. All the time. Okay, I said. I put every ounce of defeated exhaustion I could manage into that single word, let it sag under its own weight, let it sound like a man setting down something he had been carrying for too long. Okay, Julian. I'll start getting my things together. That's good, Dad. That's really good. The movers will be there Monday at 8. Just have your clothes and personal items ready. Don't worry about the furniture. All right, I said. I love you, son. Another pause. 2 seconds this time. Love you too, Dad, Julian said. And he ended the call. I stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand and the recorder blinking on the counter, and the forged power of attorney spread across the granite island, and the September light coming through the window above the sink, the light falling across Meredith's roses still burning red against the fence. And I felt the last manageable version of this grief finish closing behind me, like a door I would not be opening again. I reached over and pressed stop on the recorder. Then I picked up the satellite phone and called Evelyn back. I need everything, I told her. Start now. After I ended the call with Evelyn, I stood in the kitchen for a long moment, with my hand still resting on the satellite phone, and the forged documents spread across the granite island, and the recorder sitting silent on the counter, with everything Julian had said preserved inside it like an insect caught in amber. Then I walked down the hallway. I did not plan to stop at Meredith's door. I had walked this hallway 10,000 times in the 22 months since she had been gone, and I had learned which version of myself arrived at that door on any given day, sometimes the version that could open it and go inside and sit quietly among her things, and sometimes the version that could only press one hand flat against the wood and keep moving. That afternoon, I stopped and stood there with my hand on the doorknob, and the autumn light coming in pale and thin through the window at the end of the hall, and I turned the handle and went in. The room smelled the way it always did. Faintly of the rosewater she kept on the dresser, faintly of old wood, and the particular stillness of a space that had not been aired out recently. The curtains were the ones she had chosen from a catalog 12 years ago. Ivory cotton with a narrow blue stripe, and the afternoon light came through them soft and diffuse, and fell across the quilt on the bed in a way that made the room look for just a moment like a painting of itself rather than the thing it actually was. I noticed the faint impression in the carpet near the window, a heel mark narrower than mine. Chloe had stood here 6 days ago, the morning after the wedding, and I had watched her on the camera feed from the garden, with my thumb pressed against my phone screen, and my jaw so tight it ached for the rest of the day. She had stood in this exact spot and raised her phone and filmed the room while she talked about paint colors and furniture disposal, and I had stood among Meredith's roses in the September sun and let her do it, because stopping her would have meant showing my hand before I was ready to play it. I crossed to the bed and sat down on the edge of it on Meredith's side, which I had never done in the 22 months since she died. The mattress gave slightly under my weight, and the quilt shifted, and the scent of rosewater became momentarily stronger, and I had to press both palms flat against my thighs and breathe through my teeth until the feeling passed. I thought about the hospital. It had been a Tuesday in November 2 years ago, almost to the week. The oncologist had called me at 6 in the morning and used the phrase accelerating significantly, which in the careful language of medicine means something is ending, and the timeline for its ending has compressed beyond what anyone previously estimated. I drove to Providence Medical Center in the dark, through streets still wet from overnight rain, and I sat in the chair beside Meredith's bed and held her hand and thought about all the conversations we had not finished yet, and all the places we had talked about going and had not gone. At 7:30 that morning, I called Julian. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. I told him as plainly and directly as I could that his mother was in the final stage and that he needed to come. He said, "Is it happening right now?" I said the doctors were telling me it was a matter of days, possibly less. He said, "I have a presentation this morning that I can't move, Dad. I'll come this afternoon, okay? She'll still be there this afternoon." I did not argue with him. I had learned by then that arguing with Julian about anything that required him to interrupt his life for someone else's emergency was an exercise in exhaustion that left me emptier than when I started. He did not come that afternoon. He called at 4 o'clock and said the presentation had run long, and there was traffic on I-205, And he would come first thing in the morning. She would understand. She always understood. I held the phone against my ear and looked at Meredith's face against the pillow. Her eyes were closed. Her breathing had changed. The nurse had come in twice in the past hour to check the monitors, and I said, "All right, Julian. Drive safe." I called him 6 more times over the next 31 hours. He answered twice. The second time at 11:15, the night before she died, he told me he was sure she was stronger than the doctors thought, and that he would be there by 9 the next morning, he promised. Meredith died at 3:17 in the morning. I was holding her left hand. The room was quiet, except for the equipment and the distant sounds of the hospital corridor, and the particular quality of darkness that exists in a room where a person is leaving it for the last time. I held her hand, and I talked to her softly about the roses, about the fishing trip I had taken the previous August, about the way the light came through the kitchen window on winter mornings, and made the whole room look like it was made of honey. I do not know what she heard. I believe she heard something. I have to believe that. At 3:18, a nurse came in and did the things that nurses do quietly, and with a practiced kindness that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. And then she brought me a cup of coffee that I did not drink, and pulled a chair close to the bed, and sat with me for a while without saying anything, which was exactly the right thing to do. Julian arrived at 9:45 the next morning. He was wearing a pressed shirt, and his hair was combed, and he smelled like the same cologne he had worn since college, and he stood in the doorway of the room for a moment, before he came in, and his face did the thing faces do when they are constructing an expression, rather than simply having one. He held me for a moment. He said, "I'm so sorry, Dad." I got here as fast as I could. He stayed for 2 hours. He took a photograph in the room, not of anything in particular, just the room itself, the flowers on the windowsill, the light. And I saw him later that day on Meredith's phone, which I still had in my jacket pocket, post it with the caption, "Forever in our hearts." Rest easy, Mom. The post received 214 responses by evening. He left at noon because he had calls he could not reschedule. I sat on the edge of Meredith's bed in the September afternoon light, and I thought about that morning, about the pressed shirt and the combed hair and the 2 hours and the 214 responses, and I thought about the recording on the kitchen counter with Julian's voice on it, confirming a memory that did not exist, and I thought about a document with my name printed on it in laser ink, dated to a day I was sitting on a boat in the middle of the Gulf of Alaska, thinking about her. There is a specific kind of grief that arrives not when you lose someone you love, but when you finally understand the full shape of what you lost. When the inventory becomes complete, and you can see it all at once, not just the person, but everything that person believed about the people around her that turned out, in the end, not to be true. Meredith had loved Julian with the fierce and slightly willful love of a mother who had decided early on to see the best version of her child, and had continued to see it long past the point where the evidence supported her. She had made excuses for his absences and his silences, and the particular quality of his attention, which was always most focused on whatever was most useful to him at any given moment. She had loved him the way you love a garden in a difficult climate, more work than it should be, but worth it, always worth it. Sitting on the edge of her bed, I understood for the first time and completely that the decision I had made in the hospital at 3:18 in the morning, the decision not to tell Julian about the Meredith Vance family trust, not to tell him about the $140 million in resort properties and farmland and commercial real estate that his mother had built over 30 years and placed entirely in my hands, had not been my decision alone. Meredith had made it first. She had built the trust the way she built everything, carefully, quietly, with her name on. Nothing that did not need to have her name on it. She had sat across from Evelyn Ross in a lawyer's office in the spring before she got sick, and she had said, According to Evelyn, Arthur will know what to do with it, and Julian will become whoever he's going to become without any help from me. She had known. She had seen it too, the same thing I had spent years almost seeing and then looking away from. She had loved him through it and structured her estate around it and trusted me to handle whatever came afterward. I stood up from the bed and smoothed the quilt where I had been sitting. I looked at the photograph on the dresser, the one from the Oregon coast, the one with the wind and the laughter, and I felt something settle in me that was not peace exactly, but was the thing that sometimes comes just before peace, the thing that feels like clarity when you have been in fog for a very long time. "I've got it, Meredith," I said quietly to the room, and the light, and whatever remained of her, in the particular way that people remain in the places where they were most themselves. "I know what to do." I walked out of the room and pulled the door almost closed behind me, leaving it open just enough to let the light in, and I went back down the hallway toward the kitchen, toward the recorder and the documents and the satellite phone, toward the work that was waiting for me. The kitchen felt different when I came back to it. Not smaller exactly, but more defined, the way a room looks when you have been away from it long enough to see it clearly instead of just inhabiting it. The forged documents were still spread across the granite island. The recorder sat beside them with its red light dark. The afternoon had tilted toward evening without my noticing, and the light through the window above the sink had gone from gold to the particular pale gray that precedes an Oregon sunset. I sat down at the kitchen island and pulled the satellite phone toward me. I had spoken to Evelyn briefly that morning, 2 quick calls, one before Julian and one after, but I had not yet given her the full scope of what I needed. I pressed her contact, and she answered before the second ring had finished. "I've been waiting," she said. No preamble, no pleasantries. This was one of the things I valued most about Evelyn Ross. She understood that there were conversations that did not benefit from warm-up. "The alert came through at 9:47 this morning," I said. "I need the full routing detail on that wire transfer. Everything originating account receiving institution, the beneficial owner behind Meridian Care Solutions, LLC. Already pulled it," Evelyn said, and I heard the precise click of her keyboard in the background, the sound of a woman who thought faster than most people talked. Meridian Care Solutions, LLC, was registered in Cook County, Illinois 14 months ago. Single registered agent, no physical office address on file, just a mail forwarding service in a strip mall in Cicero. The receiving account at First Midwest Bank has received 11 wire transfers in the past 8 months from 6 different originators, all transfers under $40,000. I sat with that for a moment. "All under $40,000, I repeated. "Every single one," Evelyn confirmed. "Which means whoever is running that account understands exactly how the Bank Secrecy Act works. Under federal law, financial institutions are required to file a currency transaction report for any cash transaction exceeding $10,000. Wire transfers have a different threshold, but sophisticated actors stay well below $40,000 to avoid triggering the additional scrutiny that larger transfers attract. What Julian did this morning, wiring $39,985, was not careless. It was calculated. It was also a federal crime," I said. "Structuring," Evelyn said, using the legal term for the practice of deliberately breaking up transactions to avoid reporting thresholds. 31 U.S. Code Section 5324. It carries up to 5 years in federal prison per transaction, separate from whatever fraud charges attach to the underlying theft. She paused. "Arthur, whoever is receiving this money, they have been doing this for a while. This is not a first offense. This is a system." "I know," I said. "That's what I need you to find, the system behind it." I heard her exhale slowly through her nose. "I've already started. I want you to understand what you're asking for, though. A full forensic audit of Julian and Chloe's financial history. Every account, every transfer, Every corporate registration they're connected to is not a small undertaking. I have 3 people I trust completely to do this work without leaving any footprints. I'm bringing all 3 of them in tonight. What do you need from me? Nothing except time, she said, and the assurance that you're not going to do anything that alerts them before I have the complete picture. They think I'm packing boxes, I said. A brief pause on the line. Then unexpectedly, Evelyn Ross laughed a short, dry sound, more admiring than amused. Of course they do. Another click of the keyboard. Arthur, I want to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly. Go ahead. How bad do you think it is? Not the house, not the pension account. The underlying situation. In your estimation, how desperate are they? I thought about Julian's voice on the phone that morning. The flatness of it. The absence of any emotional texture that was not deliberately placed there. I thought about Chloe standing at the bottom of my porch steps in her white blazer, examining my peeling paint, with the focused attention of a woman calculating renovation costs before she has even finished evicting the current occupant. Desperate enough to forge federal documents, I said. Desperate enough to wire money to a shell company in Illinois the same morning they served the notice. They are not doing this to improve their situation, Evelyn. They are doing this to survive something. There is a creditor somewhere that they are more afraid of than they are of a prison sentence. The keyboard clicking stopped. That changes the scope of what I'm looking for, she said, and her voice had shifted into a register I recognized from the 2 years we had worked together. The register of a woman who has just identified the load-bearing wall in a complicated structure and is reorienting her entire approach around it. It does, I agreed. Find the creditor. Find out what they owe to whom and what the deadline is. That is the center of this. Everything else is scaffolding. Give me until tomorrow morning, Evelyn said. I'll have a preliminary package ready by 2 a.m. Send it to the encrypted server. I'll be awake, I said. I know you will. A brief pause. Arthur, Meredith built something extraordinary. I want you to know that I have never in 30 years of this work managed assets that were assembled with more care or more foresight. Whatever happens with Julian, whatever this turns out to be, that is not going to touch what she built. My throat tightened in a way I had not expected, a sudden physical response to hearing her name said by someone who had known her, who had sat across a conference table from her and watched her mind work. Thank you, Evelyn, I said. That means more than you know. Get some rest if you can, she said. You're going to need to be sharp tomorrow. She ended the call. I set the satellite phone down on the granite island beside the forged documents and sat for a moment in the quiet kitchen. Outside, the last of the daylight was draining out of the sky over Portland, leaving behind a deep blue that was almost purple at the edges, the kind of sky that made the city look briefly like somewhere worth painting. The roses along the south fence had gone dark and shapeless in the fading light, just masses of shadow now rather than the burning red they had been that morning. I reached over and picked up the recorder, turned it in my hands once and set it down again. Then I gathered the forged documents, aligned their edges carefully, and returned them to the manila envelope. I carried the envelope to my study and placed it in the fireproof filing cabinet beside my desk in the drawer I kept locked next to the fishing log with the August 14th entry. 2 documents. 2 different kinds of truth. One that someone had manufactured, and one that I had simply lived. I went back to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water from the tap, because Meredith always said that people in difficult situations reached for coffee or whiskey when what they actually needed was water, and she was usually right about things like that. I drank the water standing at the sink, looking out at the darkened garden, and I thought about what Evelyn had said. Find the creditor. Because whoever had Julian and Chloe frightened enough to commit federal fraud against their own father, that entity was the real engine of everything that had happened today. And an engine, once you understood its mechanics, could always be stopped. Through the kitchen window, the light in Dorothy Haynes's house next door clicked on warm and yellow in the early dark. I watched it for a moment. Dorothy had been sitting on her front porch every morning for 22 years, watching this neighborhood, the way only someone with nothing to hide and nowhere urgent to be ever really watches anything. I had not yet thought about what Dorothy might have seen. The light in Dorothy's window stayed on steady and warm while I stood at the sink finishing my water. I found myself thinking about the morning 10 days ago when Julian had pulled into my driveway in that imported sedan of his unannounced, carrying 2 paper grocery bags and wearing the particular expression he always wore when he was performing generosity. A kind of bright, slightly effortful openness, like a man holding a door that is heavier than he expected. I had been in the workshop when I heard his car. I came out wiping my hands on a shop rag, and he was already at the front door, with the bags calling out that he had bought groceries, that he wanted to make his old man a proper meal for once, that he hoped I still had that big stock pot, because he was going to make the vegetable soup Meredith used to make on cold Sundays. I should say here that I am not by nature a suspicious man. I spent 40 years working alongside engineers and machinists and plant supervisors, and I learned early that most people are doing exactly what they appear to be doing, and that the machinery of daily life runs on a sufficient quantity of good faith to keep it functional. I had extended that good faith to my son for his entire life, sometimes past the point where the evidence supported it, because that is what fathers do, and because I had loved him, and because Meredith had asked me to, in the particular way she asked for things she cared about, deeply, not with words exactly, but with the quality of her attention when the subject came up. But I want to be precise about what happened that morning, because precision matters when you are reconstructing a sequence of events that someone else has deliberately obscured. Julian set the groceries on the kitchen counter and began unpacking them with the easy familiarity of a man in his childhood home. He found the stockpot in the cabinet where it had always lived, filled it at the sink, and set it on the front right burner of the stove. He turned the flame to medium and began chopping carrots and celery on the cutting board, talking the whole time about a project at work, about a restaurant he and Chloe had tried the previous weekend, about nothing that required my full attention or my presence in any specific location. And then, at the precise moment the water in the pot began to produce its first wisps of steam, he asked about the socket wrenches. "Dad, you still have that metric set, the Craftsman ones, the full set. Chloe's car has a bracket rattling loose under the hood, and I keep meaning to tighten it." I knew where those wrenches were. They were at the bottom of the red steel toolbox in the far corner of the detached garage, under 2 removable trays of smaller tools, behind the box of fastener assortments I had been meaning to reorganize for 3 years. Finding them would take 10 minutes at minimum longer, if I could not remember which tray I had put the metric extensions under. What I want to be precise about is this. When I turned toward the back door to go to the garage, I had already smelled it. Not strongly, just a thread of it, the faint sulfuric edge that gas companies add to natural gas specifically so that people can detect leaks before they become dangerous. It was coming from the stove. Not the burner Julian had lit, but the secondary burner beside it, the one that was dark, the one that should have been completely off. I stopped walking. I stood with my hand on the back door handle, and I breathed in slowly through my nose, and I confirmed what I had smelled. Then I made a decision that I have thought about many times since, and that I believe was the right one, even knowing everything that followed. I went to the garage. I went because if I had turned around and confronted Julian in that moment, I would have shown him that I knew and I did not yet know enough. I knew that the secondary burner was slightly open. I did not know whether that was carelessness or intention. I did not know whether Chloe was involved or whether this was some private recklessness of Julian's own. I did not know what the end game was supposed to be. An engineer does not shut down a system the moment he detects an anomaly. He observes. He documents. He waits for the system to complete its failure sequence so he can understand the full scope of what he is dealing with. I went to the garage, and I took my time finding the wrenches. I moved slowly through the toolbox trays with deliberate care, and I counted the minutes in my head, and at the 8-minute mark, I heard the smoke alarm in the kitchen begin its flat, urgent screaming. I put the wrenches down and walked back to the house. The kitchen was thick, with the acrid gray smoke of burnt vegetable matter, the soup boiled over onto the open flame, the burner still running. I went directly to the stove and turned off both the lit burner and the secondary one, the one that had been releasing gas for at least 8 minutes into an enclosed kitchen. I waved a dish towel at the smoke alarm until it stopped. I opened the windows. I wiped down the stove with a wet cloth, moving the blackened residue of overflowed broth away from the burner rings. Julian and Chloe came through the front door 4 minutes later. They were slightly breathless, their faces arranged into expressions of alarm that were technically convincing. Julian went straight to my shoulders, gripping them, looking at my face the way you look at someone you have been frightened for. "Dad, what happened?" We could see smoke from the street. "Are you okay? Did you turn the burner up before you went outside?" I looked at my son's face. I looked at the specific quality of his concern, the brightness of it, the slight excess of it, the way his eyes were moving across my face rather than settling, checking my reaction rather than simply responding to it. "I must have," I said. "I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking." Chloe put her hand on my arm. "It's okay, Arthur," she said in the tone of a woman practicing patience. "These things happen. That's why we worry." They stayed for 40 minutes. Julian made a show of checking the stove settings and the gas line connection under the range, explaining each step in the slow, simplified language of a person who has decided the person they're talking to can no longer be trusted with full sentences. Chloe sat at the island, with her phone occasionally glancing up with an expression of mild managerial concern. When they left, Julian hugged me at the door and said he would call tomorrow to check on me. He did not call the next day, or the day after. That evening, after their car had turned the corner and disappeared, I went to my study and I took the leather journal off the shelf, and I opened it to a fresh page, and I wrote 3 lines in my careful engineer's hand. September 10th. Julian. Gas burner left partially open. Secondary burner, not the cooking burner. Smelled it before I left the kitchen. Observed for 8 minutes. Deliberate. Then I closed the journal, put it back on the shelf, and went to the storage room for the security cameras I had purchased 2 years ago and never installed because Meredith had said she didn't want to feel like she lived in an office building. She wasn't here to say it anymore. I installed 4 cameras that night. I activated the trigger alert on the bank account the following morning, and I put the satellite phone in the floor safe fully charged because Evelyn had been telling me for 6 months that I should keep it accessible, and I had been putting it off the way you put off things that feel like admissions of a reality you are not ready to live in. I was ready now. I rinsed my water glass at the sink and set it on the drying rack, and the small domestic ordinariness of that action, the sound of water, the weight of glass, the familiar resistance of the faucet handle pulled something loose in my memory that I had been keeping carefully in place since morning. Meredith used to say that the truest things about a person reveal themselves not in the large moments, but in the small ones. Not at funerals or weddings or moments of crisis, but at restaurant tables, in checkout lines, in the particular way someone treats a stranger who has nothing to offer them. She had said this to me 30 years ago over a diner breakfast somewhere in Eastern Oregon, watching a man at the next table snap his fingers at a waitress. And I had agreed with her then, and I agreed with her, still standing at my kitchen sink on a Tuesday evening, with the evidence of my son's intentions spread across the island behind me. 3 weeks before the wedding, Julian had called to invite me to dinner. He said it was a celebration, an engagement party of sorts, late but intentional, a chance for me to meet some of Chloe's friends before the ceremony. He named a restaurant in the Pearl District called The Greystone, I had driven past it once and noticed the valet stand and the kind of exterior lighting that establishments use when they want you to understand, before you reach the door, that your evening is going to be expensive. I wore my good jacket, the charcoal wool one Meredith had picked out for me at a department store in downtown Portland 8 years ago, telling me that every man needed one jacket that made him look like he had his life in order, even when he did not. I drove myself parked 2 blocks away because I had never trusted valet parking, and walked in to find Julian and Chloe already seated at a round table near the window with 6 other people I had never met. The introductions were quick and slightly performative. Chloe's college roommate and her husband, a couple who worked in commercial real estate, 2 men from Julian's firm, whose names I did not retain because they barely looked at me when we shook hands. Everyone was dressed in the careful, expensive way of people who want you to understand that this is not how they dress every day, and also that it is absolutely how they dress every day. I was given the seat with its back to the room. Julian ordered wine before anyone had opened a menu. A bottle at $800, which I knew because I saw the list when the sommelier handed it to me first, out of reflex, and Chloe reached over and redirected it toward Julian with a smile that did not include me. The food that followed was the kind of food that requires the waiter to explain what it is. Small portions arranged on large plates, each component introduced by its geographic origin. I ate what was put in front of me and listened to conversations I was not included in, and watched my son perform the role of successful cosmopolitan professional for an audience that had apparently paid admission. At some point in the evening, a young man appeared at my elbow to refill my water glass. He was perhaps 28, with the watchful, slightly tired expression of someone working a double shift on a weekday. His name tag said Roy. He refilled my glass with the careful efficiency of a person who has learned that invisible service is valued more than acknowledged service at tables like this one. And as he straightened up, our eyes met briefly, and he gave me the small, neutral nod that service industry workers exchange with customers they have correctly identified as non-threatening. The check arrived at 9:45. Julian looked at it, looked at me, and pushed it across the white tablecloth with the easy confidence of a man who has performed this particular gesture before and found it effective. "Dad, you want to grab this one? I left my wallet in the car." The table had gone momentarily quiet in the particular way that tables go quiet when something slightly awkward is about to happen. I reached for the leather folder and opened it. $1,412 before tip. I had $200 in my wallet and a credit card, with a limit I maintained deliberately low because I had spent 4 decades living within means that bore no relationship to the actual scale of my resources, and because Evelyn had advised me years ago that the surest way to keep a secret was to make the secret unnecessary to keep. If no one suspected there was anything to find, no one would go looking. I set my card in the folder and closed it. Chloe had turned to the woman on her left, and her voice, pitched for that specific conversation, carried the 3 feet to my ears without difficulty. "Oh, wow," she said, in the bright carrying tone of someone making a joke they want the whole table to hear. "I always heard engineers made good money. Guess the pension isn't quite what it used to be." The woman she was speaking to laughed politely. 2 of the men across the table exchanged a quick glance. Julian was looking at his wine glass. I signed the receipt. I did not add a tip because I had done the math on what remained on my card, and the arithmetic did not accommodate one, and I set the pen down and folded my copy and put it in my jacket pocket. Roy came to collect the folder. He looked at the signed slip, and something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, just a brief tightening around the eyes of a man who has been working for hours and has just confirmed that he will not be compensated for it. He was too professional to say anything. He picked up the folder, straightened the place settings with a few efficient movements, and turned away. I saw him 30 seconds later take his phone from his apron pocket and photograph the itemized receipt on the service station counter. He typed something quickly, and put the phone away. I understood exactly what he was doing, because I would have done the same thing when something unfair happens to you. In a way that you cannot address directly, you document it. It is a human instinct. It is also occasionally useful. I said my goodbyes at the door. Julian hugged me with one arm, the half-embrace of a person who has already moved on to the next moment. Chloe smiled and said they were so glad I could make it. I walked back to my car 2 blocks away in the early September evening, with the receipt in my jacket pocket, and Meredith's voice in my head, saying what she always said about people and small moments, and the truest things revealing themselves when nobody thinks anyone important is watching. She had been right again. I drove home, made tea, sat at the kitchen table, and for the first time allowed myself to think clearly about what I had been almost thinking for months. Not about Julian's occasional coldness, or his tendency to treat my house as a storage facility for his surplus furniture. Not about Chloe's habit of appraising rooms rather than entering them. Something larger and more deliberate than any of that. A pattern. The kind of pattern that a structure reveals when you step back far enough to see the whole thing rather than its individual components. I did not reach any conclusions that night, but I went to bed with the receipt still in my jacket pocket, and I did not throw it away in the morning. The pattern I had been almost seeing for months came into full focus the day after the wedding. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened that afternoon, because the facts of it are straightforward enough, but the meaning of it is something I am still carrying in a part of my chest that does not have a good name in any language I know. I had been to my son's wedding the day before. I had worn the tuxedo that Meredith had always said made me look like a man who knew something that other men did not. I had stood in the second row of a rented event space in the West Hills and watched Julian marry Chloe Harmon under a canopy of white flowers, and I had shaken hands with people whose names I would not remember, and eaten food that had been catered by someone with strong opinions about microgreens, and I had driven home alone at 10:30 in the evening and sat in Meredith's kitchen and talked to her photograph for a while the way I sometimes did when the day had been too large to process in silence. The following afternoon, a Sunday, Chloe came to the house alone. She texted first a brief message that said she wanted to stop by and see how I was settling in after the excitement of the previous day, which was an odd phrase to use about a man returning to the home he had lived in for 31 years, but I did not remark on it. I replied that she was welcome, and I went out to the garden to water the roses because the September heat had been harder than usual on them, and Meredith had always said that roses in stress need water before they need anything else. Before I went outside, I checked the camera feeds on my phone. All 4 cameras were active, the 2 interior ones I had installed the evening after the gas burner incident, one covering the entry and living room, and one covering the kitchen and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. I slipped the phone into my shirt pocket, with the screen facing out where I could feel it vibrate if the motion sensors triggered. Chloe arrived at 2:15. I heard her car in the driveway and came around the side of the house to meet her. She was wearing a linen dress and carrying a small paper bag that turned out to contain 2 croissants from a bakery in the Pearl District, a gesture of the type that is designed to be mentioned rather than consumed. "I just wanted to check on you," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek, in the way she always greeted me, contact without contact. "Yesterday was a lot. Big emotions. I know these family events can be hard when you're on your own." "I appreciate that," I said. "Come in. I'll put the kettle on." I held the door open, and she stepped inside, and I followed her in and went directly to the kitchen to fill the kettle. My phone vibrated once against my chest, the motion sensor in the entry camera registering her movement. I set the kettle on the burner and watched the small screen in my shirt pocket as Chloe moved through the entry hall. She did not stop in the living room. She did not sit at the kitchen island or examine the framed photographs on the entry wall, or do any of the things a person does when they are visiting someone else's home and want to appear interested in it. She walked down the hallway with the purposeful, slightly accelerated stride of a person who knows exactly where they are going and has a limited amount of time to get there. She opened the door to Meredith's room. I stood at the kitchen counter with my hand on the kettle handle and my eyes on the phone screen, and I breathed through my nose, the way I had learned to breathe when I was watching something I needed to see clearly, without the interference of my own reaction, distorting my perception of it. The camera in the hallway caught the angle of the open door and part of the room's interior. Chloe stepped inside, and I saw her raise her phone. The small screen of my camera feed showed her moving slowly through the space her own phone extended recording. I could not hear what she was saying. The interior cameras I had installed were visual, only I had not yet added audio capability, which was something I would correct within the week. But I did not need audio to understand what I was watching. I had spent enough time in planning meetings and site assessments to recognize the body language of a person conducting an inventory. The way she turned at the window measuring the light. The way she moved to the center of the room and rotated slowly, establishing sight lines. The way she pulled open the nightstand drawer, glanced inside and let it fall shut with the brief dismissive efficiency of someone checking a box, rather than handling something that belonged to someone else. That drawer contained Meredith's reading glasses, a small notebook she had used for grocery lists and occasional observations, and a paperback mystery novel she had been halfway through when she got sick, and that I had not moved or opened since. My jaw tightened until I felt it in my temples. The kettle began to whistle. I lifted it and poured water into the 2 mugs I had set out, and by the time Chloe came back down the hallway and appeared in the kitchen doorway, I had arranged my face into the expression of a man who had spent the last 5 minutes thinking about nothing more troubling than tea. "Beautiful room," she said, settling onto the bar stool at the island. "Such good light in the morning, I bet." "East-facing." "It is," I said. I set her mug in front of her. Meredith chose it for that reason. She liked to read in the mornings. Chloe wrapped both hands around the mug. "You know, Arthur, once you're settled somewhere new, you might find it's actually a relief not to have so much space to maintain. A smaller footprint. Less upkeep." She smiled at me over the rim of the mug with the warm, slightly pitying expression of a person delivering good news they expect you to be too limited to appreciate. Change can be good. I looked at her across the kitchen island, this woman who had walked into my wife's room with her phone raised before the croissants were even unwrapped. And I thought about Meredith's voice saying what she always said about small moments and true things. And I kept my face entirely still and said, "You might be right, Chloe." She stayed for 20 minutes. She ate 1 croissant, left the other, and told me Julian sent his love, which I noted he was apparently unable to send himself. When she was gone, I went back to the hallway and stood outside Meredith's door. I pushed it open and went inside. The room was exactly as it had been, the quilt undisturbed, the photograph on the dresser. Undisturbed, the nightstand drawer, pushed slightly further closed than I usually kept it, which was the only evidence that anyone had touched anything. I opened the drawer and checked Meredith's notebook and her glasses, and the half-finished mystery novel, and they were all still there. And I stood for a moment with my hand resting on the cover of the novel, and felt something move through me that was not grief exactly, because grief had become a familiar and almost manageable thing, but was rather the specific pain of watching something sacred be treated as inventory. I did not cry. I had cried in this room once on the night of Task Force events, and that had been the right time for it. This was not the right time. This was the time for something colder and more useful. I went to my study and pulled up the camera footage on my desktop computer and watched the full 7 minutes and 40 seconds of Chloe and Meredith's room, and I saved it to the encrypted drive that Evelyn had set up for me, and I labeled the file with the date and a single word: premeditation. I did not sleep well, which I had expected. I lay in bed until 4:30 and then stopped pretending and got up, made coffee and sat at the kitchen island with the recorder and the forged documents, and the satellite phone arranged in front of me, like the components of a machine I was still learning to operate. The house was very quiet in the particular way that houses are quiet before 5 in the morning, when the neighborhood has not yet started its engines, and the birds have not yet made their case for the day, and the silence felt less like peace than like the held breath before something arrives. I reviewed what I had confirmed in the previous 20 hours. The signature on the power of attorney was mechanically reproduced, not written by hand, but printed by a laser system using a scanned copy of my genuine signature from an older document. The date on the notarization was August 14th, the day I had spent on a commercial fishing boat in the Gulf of Alaska with 14 witnesses and a captain whose name was on a federal charter manifest. The wire transfer of $39,985 had left my account at 9:47 yesterday morning, structured deliberately below the threshold that would trigger automatic federal reporting, and had arrived in a shell company registered to a mail forwarding address in Cicero, Illinois. Evelyn was running the forensic audit. The recorder held Julian's voice, confirming a memory that had never happened. The camera drive held 7 minutes and 40 seconds of Chloe conducting an inventory of a dead woman's bedroom the day after her own wedding. What I did not yet have was the external perspective. My own observations, my own recordings, my own documentation. These were the view from inside the system. What I needed was the view from outside it. The view from, for instance, a front porch on the north side of Buckman Street, occupied every morning from 6 o'clock onward by a 74-year-old woman with 3 cats, a garden of award-winning hybrid tea roses, and the particular quality of attention that develops in people who have lived long enough and quietly enough to notice everything that happens within their line of sight. My phone rang at 6:47. Dorothy Haynes. I picked up on the first ring. Dorothy. Arthur. Her voice had the warm, slightly rough quality of someone who had been awake for a while and had opinions about the morning. Dorothy Haynes had lived next door to Meredith and me for 22 years, and in that time I had learned that she called when she had something specific to say and did not call otherwise, which made her, in my experience, one of the more reliably useful people in any given situation. I've been sitting on this since yesterday, and I decided I couldn't sit on it anymore. Are you all right? I'm managing, I said. What is it, Dorothy? I need to show you something. A brief pause, the sound of her settling into what I recognized as her porch chair, the particular creak of old wicker that I had been hearing through my kitchen window for 2 decades. I have a video on my phone. I took it from my front porch. I want to send it to you right now, and I want you to tell me what you think it means, because I think I already know what it means, and I want to be wrong. Send it, I said. 30 seconds later, my phone buzzed with an incoming video file. I opened it and pressed play. The footage was steadier than I expected from a 74-year-old holding a phone at 6 in the morning, which told me something about Dorothy that I had not previously quantified. The camera was aimed across the narrow residential street at my house, the front facade, the porch, the garden beds along the foundation. The timestamp in the corner read September 6th, 7:18 in the morning, 1 week before the wedding. Chloe's car was parked at the curb in front of my house. Chloe herself stood on the public sidewalk in front of my living room window, holding what appeared to be a phone or a small tablet, extending it toward the window, and then pulling it back, extending it again. After a moment, I understood what she was doing. She was using a measuring application, the kind that uses the phone's camera and built-in sensors to calculate dimensions remotely. She was measuring my living room window from the sidewalk. She moved methodically, window to window along the front of the house, then the width of the porch, then something about the roof line that I could not interpret from Dorothy's angle. She spent 11 minutes on the sidewalk. She did not knock on the door. She did not look toward Dorothy's porch. When she was finished, she got back in her car and drove away. My coffee had gone cold while I watched. Dorothy, I said, When did you decide to record this? The second time she came, Dorothy said. She was there twice before the wedding. First time I thought maybe she was just, I don't know, curious about the neighborhood. Newlyweds looking at houses, something like that. But the second time she had the measuring thing out again, and she was writing things down, and I thought that is not a woman who is thinking about buying a house nearby. That is a woman who is thinking about the house that is already there. A beat. Meredith's house. The weight of those two words, Meredith's house, landed in the center of my chest, with the precision of something that has been aimed carefully. You said Meredith's house, I said. It will always be Meredith's house to me. Dorothy said, her voice tightening slightly, not with anger, but with the particular fierceness of a woman who has decided that some things are worth being fierce about. Arthur, I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is something happening? Because yesterday I saw a black car pull into your driveway with a man in a suit who left a very thick envelope on your porch table and drove away, and you stood on that porch alone for longer than I was comfortable watching. I breathed in slowly. Yes, I said. Something is happening. Do you need help? The question was so direct and so unadorned that it took me a moment to answer it. In my experience, most people who ask whether you need help are performing the question rather than waiting for the answer. Dorothy Haynes was waiting. I need a witness, I said. I need someone who can say under oath, if necessary, what they observed from the outside. Not what I told them, what they actually saw with their own eyes. I've been watching this neighborhood for 22 years, Dorothy said. I see everything. I always have. Another pause. Meredith knew that. She used to bring me tomatoes from the garden in August, and we'd sit on my porch, and I'd tell her what I'd seen that week, and she'd laugh and say I was the best security system on the block. Her voice softened on the last sentence in the particular way that voices soften when the person speaking is managing something they have decided not to cry about. She was a good woman, Arthur. The best kind. She was, I said. You tell me what you need, Dorothy said. Whatever it is, I'm not going anywhere. I thanked her and ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in my hand, and the video still open on the screen, Chloe frozen mid-measurement on the sidewalk in front of the house she had been planning to take before she had finished planning the wedding. I forwarded the video to the encrypted drive and labeled it the way I had labeled everything else, with the date and with a word that said exactly what it was. Evidence. Then I opened a new message to Evelyn and typed, check your package. Add exterior surveillance footage dated September 6th to the file. And find out everything you can about a woman named Chloe Harmon before she became Chloe Vance. Start with her finances. I think that's where this began. I sent the message and poured my cold coffee down the sink and made a fresh pot because the morning was just getting started and there was still a great deal of work to do. The encrypted notification arrived at 2:14 in the morning. I had not been asleep. I had been sitting in my study with the desk lamp on and the rest of the house dark, reading through the Oregon statutes on power of attorney fraud for the third time, not because I needed the information, but because reading statutes is something I do when I need my mind to stay disciplined and not wander into territory that is not yet useful. The satellite phone buzzed once on the desk beside me, and the screen read, "Package uploaded. Decrypt when ready. ER." I typed in the 16-character decryption key from memory, connected the satellite phone to my desktop computer, and opened the file. Evelyn's team had organized it the way she organized everything, with the clean, hierarchical precision of someone who understood that information presented badly is information that cannot be acted on. There were 4 main folders. I opened the one labeled C. Harmon Financial History first, because that was what I had asked for last, which meant it was what she had prioritized. What I found inside took me the better part of an hour to fully understand, not because it was complicated, but because the scale of it kept requiring me to stop and recalibrate my expectations. Chloe Harmon had grown up in Marietta, Georgia, the daughter of a commercial contractor who had done well enough to send her to a small private college in Atlanta, where she had studied business administration and developed apparently an absolute conviction that she understood financial markets better than the people who had spent their careers studying them. She had moved to Portland 8 years ago, met Julian at a corporate networking event, and within 6 months established a limited liability company called Harmon Strategic Group, which she described in its registration documents as a corporate strategy consultancy. There were no clients. Evelyn's forensic team had traced every inflow of money into Harmon Strategic Group's operating account over 4 years, and found exactly 2 sources Julian's salary transferred in irregular amounts that suggested he believed he was funding a legitimate business, and a series of capital injections from a brokerage account in Chloe's name at a firm that specialized in leveraged real estate investment vehicles. The brokerage account was where the story became difficult to look at directly. Chloe had opened it 4 years ago with $80,000 Julian's bonus from that year transferred in full the week after it cleared. She had used it to purchase leveraged positions in commercial real estate investment trusts instruments that amplify both gains and losses by borrowing against the underlying asset value. In a rising market, the strategy could generate substantial returns. In a correcting market, the losses compound faster than most people can process, because you are losing not only your own money, but the borrowed money layered on top of it, and the interest on the borrowed money continues to accumulate regardless of what the market does. The commercial real estate market had corrected 18 months ago. I sat back in my chair and read the loss statement that Evelyn's team had reconstructed from brokerage records, margin call notices, and wire transfer logs. The number at the bottom of the page was $2,540,000. Chloe had lost $2.5 million of money that was not entirely hers to lose across 14 months of margin calls that she had covered first by liquidating Julian's retirement accounts, then by maxing out 3 lines of credit in Julian's name, and finally by approaching a private lender. The private lender was in the second folder labeled Meridian Capital Group Principal. Meridian Capital Group was not a registered financial institution. It had no banking license, no regulatory filings, no FDIC coverage. It operated out of an industrial building in the Pilsen neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois, and its principal, the name listed on the incorporation documents of the 3 shell companies through which it conducted business, was a man named Victor Kane. I pulled up the background file Evelyn's team had compiled on Victor Kane. He was 52 years old, originally from Bridgeport on the south side of Chicago, with a business history that included 2 dismissed fraud indictments in the mid-2000s, a civil judgment for predatory lending practices that had been settled out of court in 2019, and a current portfolio of what appeared to be legitimate commercial properties in the Chicago metro area, but which Evelyn's notes indicated were almost certainly used to move monies between his lending operation and his declared income. He was not a man who sent collection letters. The loan documents Evelyn had obtained, I did not ask how, and she had not explained, showed that Chloe had borrowed $2 million from Meridian Capital Group 11 months ago. Secured not by any physical asset, but by what the loan agreement described as anticipated inheritance proceeds from the estate of Arthur R. Vance, retired mechanical engineer, Portland, Oregon. I read that line 3 times. Chloe had borrowed $2 million from a man who broke legs by telling him that I was going to die soon and leave a substantial estate to Julian, and that Julian would use that inheritance to repay the loan. She had used my name and my anticipated death as collateral for a predatory loan from a criminal organization without my knowledge and without Julian's apparent awareness of exactly what she had told Kane to secure the money. The current balance, with 11 months of compound interest at rates that would have been illegal from any licensed lender, was $2,540,000. Kane had issued a formal demand, documented in an intercepted communication, that I also did not ask Evelyn to explain, requiring a payment of $1 million within 10 days of the date of the letter. The letter was dated September 13th, the day of the wedding. I understood now the full architecture of what had been built around me. Chloe had borrowed against my life. She had then married my son to establish a legal relationship that would support a fraudulent power of attorney claim. She had spent months building the dementia narrative through the gas burner incident and whatever other staged events I had not yet identified. She had used a forged power of attorney to transfer my house and drain my pension account, generating liquid capital to begin satisfying Kane's demand. And she needed it done before Kane's 10-day deadline expired, which was why the eviction notice had come 7 days after the wedding rather than immediately, because she had needed the marriage certificate in hand before Sterling could file anything. I sat very still in my study chair and thought about Victor Kane in his industrial building in Pilsen, waiting for a wire transfer that was supposed to represent the liquidated equity of a house belonging to a confused old man who had conveniently signed everything away. Then I thought about what it would mean to that man when the wire transfer arrived from a source he did not expect. I opened the satellite phone and dialed Evelyn. She answered immediately. "You've read it. All of it," I said. "I need you to do something that is going to require the full resources of the trust. Tell me." "Find me a licensed debt acquisition firm," I said. "One that operates in Illinois. I want to buy Victor Kane's paper, all of it. The full $2,540,000 plus whatever fees he requires to walk away clean and sign over the promissory notes." A pause. "You want to purchase Julian and Chloe's debt." "I want to own it," I said. "Every dollar they owe, every clause in every document, I want it transferred to a holding company under the trust. When that transfer is complete, they will not owe Victor Kane anything. They will owe me everything, and I will decide what happens next." The silence on the line lasted 4 seconds. Then Evelyn said in the tone of a woman who has just understood the complete dimensions of a plan and found them sound, "I'll have the acquisition structure ready by morning." "Good," I said. "And Evelyn, keep the source anonymous. Kane should think he's selling to a larger predator moving into his territory. He should feel relieved, not suspicious." "Understood," she said. "Get some sleep, Arthur." I ended the call and sat for another moment in the lamplight, with Victor Kane's file open on the screen, and the September darkness outside the window, and the particular silence of a house in which a great deal is about to change. Then I closed the laptop and went to bed, because Evelyn was right. Tomorrow was going to require me to be sharp. I woke at 8:15 with the particular clarity that sometimes follows a short but uninterrupted sleep, the kind where your mind has processed what it needed to process and presents you with the morning already organized. I lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling, running through what I knew and what remained to be done. By 8:30, I was in the kitchen with coffee and a legal pad, writing in the compressed shorthand I had used for engineering notes for 4 decades, not full sentences, just the load-bearing elements of each remaining step. The gap in my evidence was audio. I had documents, I had footage, I had a recorded phone call, and a forensic financial analysis. What I did not have was Julian and Chloe speaking freely to each other about what they had done and what they intended to do next. Every other piece of evidence I had collected was either circumstantial or captured in a context where they were performing for an audience, performing innocence for me, performing concern for Sterling. What I needed was the version of themselves that existed when they believed no one was listening. I needed to be inside their apartment. I went to the hall closet and brought down the wooden chest that held Meredith's photograph albums, 4 of them thick and heavy, their spines worn from 30 years of being taken off shelves and opened and set back. I carried the chest to the kitchen table and lifted the lid. The top album showed through the cellophane cover of its first page Meredith and me on our wedding day 1981 standing in front of a church in Medford, with the particular expression of two people who have just made a decision they are absolutely certain about. I touched the cover for a moment, then closed the chest. I also went to my study and opened the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet, the one I kept locked, and removed a small flat case that held two audio recording devices. Each was roughly the size and shape of a folded stick of gum, matte black, with an adhesive backing, protected by a peel-off strip, and a sensitivity range that could capture clear audio from 30 feet in a normally furnished room. I had purchased them 2 years ago for a purpose I had never fully articulated to myself, the way you sometimes acquire tools, because you understand that a certain kind of work may eventually be required even when you cannot yet see its specific shape. I put both devices in the breast pocket of my flannel shirt. Then I went to the kitchen counter and found the leather wallet I had removed from my regular rotation 6 months ago when I replaced it, brown, slightly worn at the corners, the kind of wallet that looks like it has been carried for a long time by a man who does not think about his wallet very often. I opened it and placed inside it a single credit card. The card had my name on it. It was connected to an account that Evelyn had established as a decoy 3 years ago at my request for reasons I had described to her at the time as precautionary. The account had a credit limit of $500,000. The card had never been used. I set the wallet on top of the wooden chest and called Chloe. She answered on the third ring. I had my voice arranged before she picked up, not the performed confusion of my call with Julian, but something quieter and more defeated, the voice of a man who has spent the night accepting something he did not want to accept. "Chloe," I said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you're busy." "Arthur," a brief pause, the half-second recalibration of someone shifting from whatever they were doing into the register they use for managing me. "What is it?" "I've been going through my things," I said, letting my breath come slightly heavier than necessary, the respiration of a man whose chest is tight with feeling. "I found Meredith's photo albums, all 4 of them. The facility, the place Julian mentioned, they said I can only bring 2 small bags, personal items." I stopped, let the silence work for me. "I can't throw them away, Chloe. I can't put them in a dumpster. Could I bring them to you, just to keep them safe? I won't stay long. I know you have things to do." The pause before her answer was 3 seconds. I could almost hear the calculation, the optics of refusing a grieving old man. His dead wife's photographs weighed against the inconvenience of having me in her apartment. "Of course," she said, in the tone of a woman performing magnanimity. "Come by this afternoon. Text me when you're downstairs." I thanked her with the excessive gratitude of a man who has learned to ask for very little, and ended the call. I drove to their building in the South Park Blocks neighborhood, a glass and steel high-rise with a uniformed doorman and a valet stand, and the particular atmosphere of a building that charges enough per month to make the tenants feel that they have arrived somewhere definitive. I texted Chloe from the lobby. She sent down a guest pass with the doorman, which told me she was not planning to come down herself, which was exactly what I had hoped. I took the elevator to the 14th floor, with the wooden chest under one arm, and my flannel shirt, and my worn jeans, and my white hair, and I watched myself in the mirrored elevator wall, and thought about the particular advantage of being consistently underestimated. The door opened, and I walked down the carpeted hallway and knocked. Chloe opened the door in a silk robe with a tablet in one hand, and the expression of a woman in the middle of something more important than this. "Come in," she said, stepping back. "Put it wherever. Just not in the entryway." I shuffled in, rounding my shoulders, shortening my steps. The physical vocabulary of diminishment that I had been practicing since the previous morning. I made it 3 steps into the living room before I caught my foot on the edge of the area rug, a Persian deep burgundy, probably $8,000, and stumbled forward, with a sharp exhale of alarm. The wooden chest slipped from my grip and hit the hardwood floor with a crack that made Chloe flinch visibly. 2 albums slid out across the floor. "For heaven's sake," Chloe said, her patience cracking open just enough to show what was underneath it. "I'm so sorry." I dropped to one knee with an effortful grunt, reaching for the nearest album. "My hands aren't—" "I'm sorry, Chloe, I've been dropping things all morning." She looked at me with the expression of a woman deciding whether to help or to supervise. And then her tablet chimed with an incoming call, and she glanced at the screen, and her entire posture changed. The robe straightened, the jaw set, the eyes went sharp and focused the way eyes go when the call you have been waiting for finally arrives. "I have to take this," she said, already turning away. "Just pick those up and put the box in the corner. Don't touch anything else." She walked toward the far end of the open kitchen, her back fully to me, her voice dropping into the low, rapid register of a conversation she did not want overheard. I worked quickly and without sound. The first device went under the sectional sofa, pressed against the center crossbeam, where the frame met the floor, a position that would capture audio from the entire open-plan living and dining area without being visible from any standing angle. I peeled the adhesive backing and pressed it firmly into place, counting 4 seconds of pressure the way the installation instructions specified, then gathered the scattered albums and stacked them neatly back into the chest. The second device required the office. I crossed the living room with the unhurried, slightly unsteady gait of an old man looking for the bathroom, found the hallway, and located the home office door ajar, the room beyond dark. I slipped inside. The room smelled of leather and the particular ozone scent of electronics left on standby. 3 monitors on a glass desk, a bookshelf of business titles arranged by spine color. I went directly to the private bathroom attached to the office, reached around the back of the porcelain toilet tank, and pressed the second device against the cool ceramic surface where the tank met the wall, invisible from any standing position, completely protected from casual cleaning, in a room where people conducted the kinds of conversations they believed were most private. Before I left the office, I typed a single message to Marcus on the satellite phone devices placed. "Request emergency consent order, under exigent circumstances, murder conspiracy, imminent threat to life of subject." I sent it and slipped the phone back into my pocket. I was back in the living room, kneeling beside the wooden chest, arranging the last album, when Chloe's call ended and her heels came clicking back across the hardwood. I looked up at her from the floor, with the expression of a man who has been struggling with a box of photographs and is grateful for any acknowledgement at all. "All set," I said. "Thank you, Chloe. This means a lot." She looked at the chest in the corner, then at me on the floor, and something moved across her face that was not quite guilt and not quite pity, but existed somewhere in the narrow geography between them. "Let me call the elevator for you," she said. In the elevator going down, I stood straight. "Before I reveal the terrifying secret Arthur uncovers next in these hidden files, comment the number 100 below, so I know you are still here with me. And please note the following part of the story includes some fictional elements and may not be entirely factual. If you prefer not to listen further, you are welcome to turn off the video right here." The drive back from the South Park blocks took 20 minutes in the early evening traffic, and I spent most of it thinking about the wallet. I had left it on the edge of the bookshelf in Julian's home office, positioned at the angle of something that had slipped from a pocket rather than been placed deliberately close enough to the edge that it was visible far enough back that it would not be immediately noticed by someone passing through the doorway. The credit card inside it was real, the account was real, and the $500,000 limit was real. What Chloe would make of finding it depended entirely on what kind of person she was when she believed no one was watching, and I had accumulated sufficient evidence at this point to form a reasonably confident hypothesis about that. I pulled into my driveway at 6:45, killed the engine, and sat for a moment in the cab of my truck with my hands in my lap. The September evening was cool and clear, the kind of evening that makes Portland look like an argument for staying. The roses along the south fence had gone deep red in the fading light, almost the color of old brick. I went inside, made a sandwich I did not particularly want, and ate it standing at the counter, because Meredith had always said that eating at the table alone was something you did when you had accepted being alone, and I had not yet accepted it and did not intend to. Then I went to my study, sat down at the desk, opened the satellite phone, and connected it to the computer. The Evelyn package was still open in the background of my desktop. I had closed 3 of the 4 folders the previous night. The fourth, the one labeled Priority Insurance, was still there, its icon sitting in the lower right corner of the screen, with the patient, slightly accusatory quality of unread mail. I had known since the previous night that whatever was in that folder was going to be the worst thing in the package. Not because Evelyn had flagged it specifically, but because of the order in which she had arranged the materials. Evelyn organized files the way a surgeon lays out instruments in the sequence they will be needed, with the most critical tool placed last, so it is freshest when the moment for it arrives. The insurance file was last. That meant it was what everything else had been building toward. I clicked on it. The folder contained 3 documents. The first was a life insurance policy application dated 7 months ago, submitted to a national carrier headquartered in Hartford, Connecticut. The insured party was listed as Arthur Raymond Vance, age 70, Portland, Oregon. The policy value was $5 million. The application had been submitted using the forged power of attorney, the same document that Sterling had used to file the fraudulent property transfer. Under the power of attorney, Chloe had signed my name on the application and declared that I had authorized her to act on my behalf in all financial and legal matters. The insurance company, reviewing a properly notarized power of attorney document, had processed the application without requiring my direct participation. I understood immediately why this was the centerpiece of everything. The house was worth perhaps $450,000 in the current Portland market. My pension account had held less than $40,000. These were meaningful amounts to people in financial distress, but they were not amounts that justified the specific legal risks Julian and Chloe had taken: the federal wire fraud exposure, the forged notary seal, the elaborate dementia narrative, career-ending prison-adjacent risks for numbers that would barely make a dent in a $2.5 million debt. $5 million made the math work. The second document was a policy rider, an additional clause that Chloe had specifically requested and paid a premium to include. It was called an accelerated death benefit provision with a care facility modifier. In standard life insurance language, an accelerated death benefit allows a terminally ill policyholder to access a portion of their death benefit while still living. The care facility modifier that Chloe had added was a less common variant. It specified that if the insured party was residing in a licensed medical care facility at the time of death, and if that death was certified by the facility's attending physician as resulting from natural causes related to the insured's documented pre-existing conditions, the full policy value would be paid out within 30 days without the standard 2-year contestability review that insurers apply to newer policies. I sat back in my chair and read that paragraph 3 times. The 30-day expedited payout. The requirement for a licensed facility, not a hospital, not a family home, a facility. The attending physician certification. The pre-existing conditions, which would be the dementia diagnosis that did not exist, but that Dr. Pemberton, the invented physician Julian, had referenced on the phone, was presumably prepared to document. The third document was a corporate registration for a business called Sonoran Care Partners, LLC, registered in Hidalgo County, New Mexico, 12 miles north of the Mexican border. Its stated purpose was residential medical care for elderly patients requiring specialized supervision. Its listed medical director was a name I did not recognize with credentials I could not verify, because Evelyn's notes in the margin of the document read, "No record of this individual in AMA database or New Mexico Medical Licensing Registry. Name likely fabricated. Sonoran Care Partners, LLC. No licensed physicians. No state oversight. No regulatory filings beyond the bare minimum required to maintain a corporate registration. An address 12 miles from a border that represented for anyone transported there without their full cognitive faculties a practical end to any reasonable chance of assistance. They were not planning to put me in a care facility. They were planning to take me somewhere that looked like a care facility on paper, sedate me into compliance with whatever combination of medications made a 70-year-old man's heart work harder than it was designed to work, wait for the inevitable, collect a death certificate from a physician who did not exist in any legitimate database, and file a $5 million insurance claim against a policy I had never known existed. I had spent 40 years working with systems that could fail catastrophically if their load-bearing elements were compromised. I had seen what happened when the pressure exceeded the tolerance of the material. I had written incident reports and failure analyses and root cause assessments for accidents that had injured people and destroyed equipment and cost companies millions of dollars to remediate. I had never before been the load-bearing element. My hands were flat on the desk in front of me, pressing down against the wood with a force I was not entirely conscious of applying. I made myself lift them, set them in my lap, breathe through my nose, count 4 seconds in and 4 seconds out, the way I had learned to regulate myself in the worst moments of Meredith's illness, when the grief wanted to become something less manageable. Then I picked up the satellite phone and called Evelyn. She answered on the first ring. "You read it," she said. Not a question. "All of it," I said. My voice came out level, which surprised me slightly. "The care facility, Sonoran Care Partners, 12 miles from this border," Evelyn said. "No licensed staff. I've had 2 people trying to reach anyone connected to that address for the past 6 hours. There is no answer at any number on file, and the physical address appears to be a converted agricultural property." A pause. "Arthur, I have to tell you something directly." "Go ahead. This is no longer a property fraud case," she said. "What you are looking at is a premeditated plan to end your life for financial gain. That is not a civil matter. That is not something we handle internally. I need to contact the FBI." "Not yet," I said. "Arthur." "Not yet, Evelyn." I kept my voice quiet. "I need the audio from the penthouse first. I need to hear them say it in their own words to each other when they believe they are completely alone. A financial forensics package and a forged document are evidence of fraud. What I want is evidence of conspiracy. I want a federal prosecutor to have everything they need to put both of them away for the rest of their lives, and I want there to be no gap in the case wide enough for a defense attorney to drive a reasonable doubt through." I paused. "Can you give me until tomorrow morning?" The silence lasted 5 seconds. "Tomorrow morning," Evelyn said finally. "And Arthur, I want you to know that whatever is in that audio, whatever you hear them say about you—" She stopped, and for the first time in 2 years of working together, I heard something underneath her professional register that was personal and unguarded. "You are not what they think you are. I need you to remember that when you listen." "I know what I am," I said. Meredith made sure of that. I ended the call, closed the insurance folder, and sat in the lamplight of my study for a long time, not thinking about anything in particular, just letting the weight of the evening settle into its proper place. Through the window, I could see the light in Dorothy's house burning steady and yellow against the dark. I did not go back to sleep after ending the call with Evelyn. At 4:15, I gave up trying, dressed, made coffee, and carried the receiver unit to my study. I put on the headphones at 4:30. The devices had been active for 11 hours. The first 40 minutes was ambient sound. The refrigerator a distant television. Chloe's voice once too muffled to resolve. I listened through all of it with the headphones pressed tight, the way you listen when you cannot afford to miss the moment the signal changes. It changed at 9:17. A door. Footsteps 2 sets. Julian was home. How did it go? Chloe's voice sharp and wound tight. He came. Julian's voice had the flatness of a man finally given permission to stop performing. He was exactly what we needed him to be. Ice against crystal. Julian pouring a drink. Did he find the wallet? Chloe asked. It doesn't matter. After Monday, it doesn't matter what he thinks about anything. My hands tightened around the edge of the desk. The facility, Julian said. I need to know what happens there. 7 seconds of silence. Then Chloe's voice shifted into the smooth, memorized register of a corporate presentation. Sonoran Care Partners provides comfort-focused care for residents with advanced cognitive decline. They use pharmaceutical protocols to manage agitation. High doses. At his age with his heart. She stopped. Restarted. It just accelerates what was going to happen anyway. The facility issues a death certificate. Natural causes. Consistent with his documented condition. He doesn't have a documented condition, Julian said. He does now. Dr. Pemberton filed the paperwork 3 weeks ago. Advanced vascular dementia. The silence that followed lasted long enough that I thought the feed had dropped. Then Julian spoke not with cold calculation, but with something worse. The voice of a man crossing a line he had promised himself he would not cross quietly, because the alternative had become too frightening to look at. 5 million, he said. That covers Kane and leaves enough to start over, Chloe said. Clean, no debt, no Kane. Monday morning he gets in the transport. By the end of the month it's done. 8 seconds. Okay, Julian said. One word. Quiet as a door closing in an empty house. I pulled the headphones off. I sat in the lamplight and breathed through the 4 count and let the full weight of what my son had become settle into its permanent place inside me. Then the doorbell rang. 5:03 in the morning. The man on my porch was about 44, dark jacket, credentials, wallet already open. The badge caught the porch light. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Marcus Reed. Evelyn Ross contacted our Portland field office 2 hours ago, he said. Are you all right, sir? I stepped back. He sat at the island, the same stool Meredith used to sit on, and looked at the headphones on the counter between us, and something in his expression shifted from professional to human. How long have you been up? He asked. Long enough, I said, and put the kettle on. Marcus listened to the full recording without moving once. When Chloe's voice said, it just accelerates what was going to happen anyway. His jaw tightened once and released. When Julian said, okay, Marcus reached over and stopped the playback himself. He picked up his coffee, drank, set it down, and looked at the wall for 4 seconds. That constitutes conspiracy to commit murder under 18 United States Code Section 1117, he said. Life imprisonment. I can have them in federal custody within the hour. I know, I said. Then why are you shaking your head? Because arresting them this morning gives them the best possible outcome, I said. Fourth Amendment suppression on the audio. Discovery complications. Kane becomes a negotiating chip. They plea down to 7 years and walk out while I am still alive to see it. I picked up the satellite phone. I want something complete. I dialed Evelyn. She answered before the first ring finished. Execute the debt acquisition, I said. Full amount $2,540,000 plus Kane's fees. Vance Family Holdings before noon. Anonymous buyer 10% premium. If he asks questions, remind him the FBI has had a file on Meridian Capital Group for 14 months. Across the island, Marcus gave me a small, precise nod. Confirmation by 10, Evelyn said, and ended the call. Marcus looked at me differently after that. The trust, he said. Not quite a question. My wife built it over 30 years, I said. $140 million. Julian has spent months destroying a man he believed was living on $3,200 a month. If he had simply waited, he never would have known, I said. I had no intention of telling him. We spent the next 20 minutes planning Monday morning. Marcus made notes, asked 3 questions, read back the summary. Then he stood, shook my hand, firm, brief, and walked out. I rinsed both mugs, dried them, put them away. 6:14. 37 hours and 46 minutes. I went to fix the screen door that had been sticking since August. The grandfather clock ran for the first time in 11 months at 7:40 Sunday evening. I had been working on it since noon with the patience that comes from having nothing left to do but wait, and the particular focus that comes from having something precise and mechanical to do while waiting. The final brass gear seated correctly on the 3rd attempt. I wound the mainspring, slowly feeling the resistance build in the way it is supposed to build. I stepped back. The pendulum began to move. The sound it made was exactly the sound I remembered. I stood in the living room and listened to it for a full minute. Evelyn had confirmed at 2 o'clock that afternoon that Vance Family Holdings was now the sole holder of Julian and Chloe's debt. Kane had accepted the premium without a single question, signed the promissory notes, and wired the confirmation before the Chicago markets closed. Marcus had sent a text at 4 warrants signed. Team confirmed. 07:45 Monday. Dorothy had called at 5. I told her she did not need to come. She said she would be on her porch if I needed her. I told her that was more than enough. I went to the cedar closet and brought out the charcoal Italian wool suit Evelyn had messengered over that morning. I put it on in front of the bedroom mirror. I straightened the jacket, adjusted the collar, and reached into the small dish on Meredith's dresser, where I kept the things that mattered most and did not need to be explained. The lapel pin was silver, small, shaped like a sprig of rosemary. Meredith had worn it to every important occasion she had ever attended. She had pressed it into my hand 2 weeks before she died and said only, "For when it counts." I attached it to my lapel. I looked at the man in the mirror for a long moment. 70 years old. White hair. The hands of someone who had built things and fixed things and carried things for half a century. Ready. I turned off the bedroom light and went to the kitchen and made tea and sat at the table until the clock in the living room chimed 10. And then I went to bed. And for the first time in 11 months, I slept without dreaming. I heard the moving truck before I saw it. The low diesel groan of it coming down Buckman Street at 7:58, 2 minutes early, the particular sound of machinery arriving to do work that someone else had ordered. I was already in my chair. The charcoal suit, the lapel pin, the coffee still hot held in both hands. Evelyn stood to my right, her silver tablet face down on the side table, her hands folded. Behind the hallway entrance, Marcus and his partner were positioned exactly where we had discussed. The staged moving boxes I had assembled 4 days ago were gone. The grandfather clock ticked. Through the front window, I watched Julian's car pull in behind the truck. Then Chloe's door opened. Then Sterling's sedan at the curb. They gathered on the sidewalk for 30 seconds, the 3 of them, with the loose confidence of people arriving to collect something already theirs. Sterling adjusted his tie. Chloe put on her sunglasses. Julian buttoned his jacket. I heard Julian's key in the front door. The door opened. Julian came in first, calling out before he had fully crossed the threshold. "We're here, Dad. The truck is outside. You need to have your—" He came around the corner into the living room and stopped so abruptly that Chloe walked into his back. I did not stand. I took a slow sip of coffee and set the mug on the side table and looked at my son across the room. Julian's face, it ran through 4 expressions in 2 seconds. Confusion, recognition, calculation, fear. In that order. Chloe stepped around him and saw the hallway, saw what was standing in it. Her sunglasses came off. Sterling pushed through behind them, already opening his briefcase. Mr. Vance, pursuant to the writ of pos. Mr. Sterling, I said, there is an envelope on the coffee table. I'd open it before you finish that sentence. Sterling's hands were shaking before he finished the first page. The envelope contained the warrant package, federal charges, a complete forensic summary, and a transcript of the audio recording from their living room. He read with the focused desperation of a man watching the floor disappear beneath him. I reached over and pressed play on the portable speaker. Chloe's voice filled the room. It just accelerates what was going to happen anyway. Then Julian's. Okay. Chloe made a sound I had never heard from a human being before. She turned on Julian with her hands raised, her composure completely gone. You said this was clean. You promised me he was just a confused old man. You dragged me into this, Julian, all of it. Your idea, your father, your mess. Julian did not answer her. He was looking at me. Marcus stepped forward. The handcuffs came out with the quiet efficiency of something that has been prepared and is simply now being used. The front door opened. Victor Kane walked in. He was broad, gray-suited, unhurried, carrying a leather portfolio with the calm of a man who has already been paid. He stopped in the center of the room, looked at Julian and Chloe, and then turned to me and inclined his head. Mr. Vance, he said. He set the portfolio on the coffee table. Transfer is complete. Penthouse vehicles accounts. Everything they listed as collateral when they came to me. He glanced at Chloe without expression. Should have read the contract more carefully. He walked back out. The door closed behind him. Sterling sat down on the floor. Julian took 1 step toward me. Dad, the movers are outside, I said quietly. They can take your things. The room was quiet by 9:15. Evelyn squeezed my hand once before she left, no words, which was exactly right. Marcus paused at the door and said they would be in touch about the hearing dates. I told him I would be available. He nodded, put his jacket on, and walked out into the September morning. I stood alone in my living room. The grandfather clock ticked. Meredith's roses were visible through the front window, burning red in the late morning light, exactly as they had been 7 days ago, when a black Mercedes pulled into my driveway, and everything began. I went to the kitchen and poured cold coffee down the sink and made a fresh pot because some things deserved to be done correctly, regardless of the circumstances. While it brewed, I looked out at Dorothy's house. She was on her porch, hands around her tea, watching nothing in particular the way she always did. When she saw me in the window, she raised her mug slightly. I raised my hand. The doorbell rang at 10:40. Roy Billings stood on the porch in his work clothes, holding a small envelope, looking like a man who had rehearsed what he wanted to say, and was no longer sure it was enough. Mr. Vance, he said. I heard I don't know exactly what happened, but I wanted you to know I kept the receipt, if you need it, if it helps. I took the envelope. It helped more than you know, I said. Thank you, Roy. He nodded and went back down the steps. I stood in the doorway for a moment, envelope in hand, listening to the clock and the birds and the ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning on Buckman Street. Then I went inside, sat at Meredith's kitchen table, and drank my coffee while it was still hot. I have told you this story not to ask for sympathy, but because I believe family justice is rarely loud. It is quiet, patient, and built one honest decision at a time. If there is one thing I want you to take from all of this, do not wait until someone takes everything before you understand what you actually have. I waited too long to see clearly. I confused silence with peace and patience with permission. Do not make that mistake. Protect what matters before you are forced to. My personal belief is simple: blood does not automatically mean loyalty. Family is not what you are born into. It is what you choose to honor every single day. And I believe God placed that fishing trip on August 14th for a reason. Some things that look like coincidence are not coincidence at all. Revenge stories in families like mine do not begin with hatred. They begin with love that was never returned in kind. That is the hardest truth I have carried out of this. If any part of this story stayed with you, if it made you think of someone you love or someone you need to protect, leave a comment below. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe these stories matter, subscribing to this channel costs you nothing and means everything. Thank you for staying until the very end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements crafted to illuminate truths that real life sometimes cannot say plainly enough. If that is not the journey you are looking for today, there is no judgment in choosing a different path. But if you are staying, I am glad you are here.